Introduction to Trans and Non-Binary Terminology. This video is about some key trans and non-binary identity terminology. There are a number of important terms to consider when talking about gender identity. Here are a few. Sex assigned at birth refers to the determination of one's biological sex on the basis of external genitalia. Chromosomes and hormones are also involved. These chromosomes, however, are hardly ever tested when a person's sex is assigned. People are generally assigned female at birth, AFAB, or assigned male at birth, AMAB. This language may be important for trans and non-binary people who do not identify with their sex assigned at birth. Intersex describes people born with differences in their sex traits and/or reproductive anatomy, resulting in bodies that do not fit what society typically defines as male or female. Gender identity refers to a person's internal sense of identifying as a woman, man, neither, both, or another gender or genders. Gender identity can either correlate with or differ from sex assigned at birth. Gender expression is the manifestation of one's gender identity. This is expressed through clothing, hairstyle, voice, behavior, mannerisms, interests, and appearances that are associated with gender. Depending on how we perceive gender expression, we may make mistakes in the gendered language we use for people of trans experience. These mistakes are called misgendering. Trans is a term that describes many gender identities for people who do not identify with their sex assigned at birth. Non-binary is a term used to describe gender identities that do not fit within the binary of male and female. Common examples include, but are not limited to, agender, having no gender identity or a gender-neutral identity, bigender, reflecting elements of masculine, feminine gender identities, gender fluid, reflecting a gender identity that is not fixed and does not recognize the traditional rules of binary gender identities. Cisgender refers to someone who identifies their gender identity with their sex assigned at birth. Gender transition refers to the myriad of actions a person may take to connect with the gender with which they identify and, in some cases, alleviate dysphoria, feelings of misalignment between a person's body and gender identity. Transition includes some or all of the following options: medical transition, including hormone therapy and gender-affirming surgeries, social transition, such as using a different name, pronouns, or presenting differently, and legal transition, changing one's name and/or gender marker on legal documents and identification. Now that we have learned about some key terminology, let's turn to some trans and non-binary community members at NYU to learn more about their experiences and ways we can support.
I think there are a lot of systems that are pretty hostile to trans life and just don't make a lot of sense. And so when I am not the only person who points those out, it can make it a lot easier to kind of move about my day to day. And this can be as simple as recognizing, for example, when a form just doesn't make any sense to a trans respondent, right? When you're looking at a box and it's asking, check this or check that. When colleagues can take the time to really learn and think about, okay, where are the access issues? Where are the barriers? And what can I do kind of on my own volition to address these problems before somebody else needs to point them out to me? I think that makes life a lot easier.
I feel like there is a certain expectation for what trans and non-binary individuals should look, act, and conform to in order for their identities to be sort of acknowledged. And it's important to realize that there is no one way to look and be trans.
I think as a non-binary person or trans person, I always feel a little on guard, even just navigating the streets and presenting in a way that sometimes people have different expectations of how they expect me to present. I feel like I'm trying to anticipate how they will respond. I always appreciate that extra affirmation or celebration of who I am and how I choose to show up. It's a way that I want to show up, and that's a way that feels good to me. And when I hear that validating response, it makes me feel just a little safer.
I think it's important for everyone to recognize that the support that you offer really makes a difference.
I think having people just be aware of what language they're using and how they're referring to other people.
Always be there for me when I am going through a change, when I am questioning whether I am, how I identify that day or the next day might be different. And knowing that it is always a process and that there's never a destination, it's always about the journey itself.
I think the best way to correct a mistake of misgendering someone is not to make it a really big deal. That can be really uncomfortable, so the best way to move forward is to just quickly correct yourself. If you feel so inclined, you can apologize very quickly, but don't harp on it, just move forward.
I think that at NYU, which is a really great place, we have a lot of potential to kind of set a tone that other people can emulate and learn from.
These terms are by no means fully comprehensive, but they are a first step in learning about and supporting trans and non-binary communities at NYU and beyond. Trans and non-binary people are not a monolith. Language and terminology may shift based on a person's multiple identities and their understanding of their own gender. It's always a best practice to mirror the language that someone uses for themselves when you refer to them. For example, if a student refers to themselves as non-binary, it's best to also use the language of non-binary when referring to them and their gender identity. To continue learning about these topics, visit the Pronouns and Gender Inclusive Language Toolkit for more videos, resources, and information at nyu.edu/pronouns.